The law of Calder was older than its stones. When the Alpha King crossed a threshold, every wolf beneath his roof lowered their eyes, because to meet the gaze of the one who ruled them was to say that you did not belong to him. Selka had watched 100 wolves do it, and she had always done it too, so that no one would look twice at the plain girl in the borrowed gray dress, who carried her foster sister's slippers and held her foster sister's comb. She had come to the choosing to serve Vesna, nothing more. Vesna was the one the whole realm had come to see, gold-haired and certain. The daughter a great house wanted a king to want. Selka was the one who fastened the clasps and stood at the wall and made herself small, because a girl with no scent and no wolf and no place in the world learned early that the safest thing to be was unseen. No one knew what she was. That was the whole of it. The single fact her foster family had spent 19 years burying a silent, the old word for it, spoken the way you spoke of a house where something had died. No wolf had ever stirred in her. The great pull that every alpha carried, the weight that pressed a room to the floor, had never once touched her, and all her life she had only pretended that it did. The doors opened and the king came in. Selka felt the room change before she understood it, felt the long line of omegas beside her bow their heads as if a wind had moved through wheat. She lowered hers with them. She had done it 10,000 times. She stared at the polished floor and waited for the terrible moment to pass. And she counted, because counting was how she kept her hands still. He was walking the line. She heard his boots, unhurried, and she heard the small sounds of each girl he passed, the caught breath, the deepening of a bow. 11 of them stood between the king and where she waited at the end of the row. Then 9, then 6. Vesna, 3 places up, sank into a curtsy so lovely it looked rehearsed, and perhaps it was. 3 now. Selka kept her eyes on the floor and told herself it would be over in a moment, that he would pass her the way the whole world always passed her, that no king had ever needed to look at the wall. 2. She could see the toes of his boots now, at the edge of her lowered sight. 1. He stopped in front of her. And here was the thing she had never let herself think about, the flaw in 19 years of hiding, because the others were not bowing by choice. The king's pull held their heads down. It was not manners. It was force, and it did not reach her, had never reached her. And now that he stood close enough that she should have been crushed flat by it, she felt only the cool air and her own heart. There was nothing to obey. There was nothing pressing her down, and when she raised her eyes out of habit, out of the deep animal need to see the thing that everyone else feared, she found she could not make herself look away again. She looked at the Alpha King of Kaldar, and the Alpha King of Kaldar looked back. He was younger than she had expected, and harder, a new crown on an old kind of face, a scar white through the dark of one brow, eyes the gray of the sky before snow. For a heartbeat, something moved behind them that she could not name, something that was not anger and was not yet anything else. Then the hall understood what it was seeing. A woman gasped. A cup rang against stone somewhere, and did not stop ringing in Selka's ears. Vesna turned, and the color left her face, and her mouth shaped a word that might have been Selka's name, or might have been a curse. Down the whole length of the great hall, 600 bowed heads stayed, bowed, and 600 wolves went utterly still, because every one of them knew the law that Selka, in her counting, had let herself forget. To hold the gaze of the Alpha King was to claim him, or to challenge him, and the price of both was death. The king did not look away from her. Very quietly, so that only the front of the hall could hear, he said, "Take her." They did not kill her in the hall, which Selka understood, later, to have been its own kind of mercy and its own kind of trap. They took her through a low door behind the dais, and down a passage that smelled of cold candle smoke, and they put her in a room with a long table and too many important people, and they shut the door. She stood where they left her, and kept her chin where her foster mother had never once managed to beat it down. There was the king, at the head of the table, not sitting. There was Vesna by the wall, all her certainty gone to something white and small. And there was a man, Selka, did not know, silver at the temples, richly dressed, who looked at her the way a man looks at a stain on a floor he is thinking of selling. "This is what we are giving an afternoon to," the man said. A serving girl who forgot her place. He turned to the king with the ease of someone used to being heard. "Malric speaks plainly, nephew, as your father liked me to. The law is not complicated. She held your eyes before the whole realm. Hang her by sundown, and let the story be that Kaldar's king suffers no challenge. Anything softer, and every house that is watching you learns that your law bends." So this was the uncle. Selka had heard of him even in the low fens of Dry Hollow, the old king's brother, who had wanted the throne and never been given it, and who now stood one careful step behind it, waiting. "She is nobody," Vesna said quickly. "Your Majesty, she is nobody. A foundling my house took in from charity. She does not know how to behave." This was not a challenge, it was ignorance. Selka looked at the foster sister. She had dressed and combed and carried, for since they were both children, and understood that Vesna was not defending her. Vesna was defending Vesna, cutting the rope before the drowning girl could pull her in. "If it was ignorance," Malric said mildly, "then hang her for that. The result on the ground is the same." "Why did you do it?" the king asked. It took Selka a moment to realize he was speaking to her, because no one of his rank had ever asked her anything. He had come around the end of the table. He was watching her with those snow-gray eyes, and the watching itself was the danger, because she could not tell him the truth. She could not say, "I did not do it, my lord. I am simply made wrong. There is no wolf in me for your power to reach. No scent for your nose to find. I am the thing your people bury quietly and speak of in the past tense." To stay silent in this room was to die twice, once for the challenge and once for the omen. So she gave them the only thing that was both true and safe. "I was afraid," she said, "and I forgot to be afraid in the way you wanted. I am sorry it looked like pride. It was not." She lifted her head another degree. "But I will not stand here and be called a beast by a man who has never gone hungry. Hang me if the law says hang me. I would rather die having looked at you than live having spent my whole life looking at the floor." The room went quiet in a new way. Malric laughed, but no one laughed with him. Vesna stared. And the king of Kaldar, who had not been told he was wrong or spoken to as a man in longer than he could easily remember, tilted his head very slightly, the way a wolf does when it hears a sound it cannot place. "There is a third path," he said at last, to the room, though his eyes did not leave her. "The law says claim or challenge. It does not say the claim must run only one way." He let that settle. "I claim her." Vesna made a small broken sound. Malric's pleasant face did not change, and that was worse than if it had. For a moment, Selka watched the king and saw, beneath the certainty he had shown the room, the cost of it. He had come to the throne young, with half the great houses still measuring him against the uncle who had wanted it longer than Corvin had been alive, and he had needed this choosing to bind Vesna's house to him. He had just thrown that away for a serving girl, in front of every wolf. Hoping he would stumble, she saw him know it, and she knew that he had chosen it anyway. "Nephew," Malric said, "you cannot set a scullery girl above the daughter of the house you most need. Vesna's father brings you 4,000 spears. What does this one bring? Beyond a story they will laugh at in every hall on the coast." "I mean," the king said, "that no one in this realm will say my law bends, because my law will have been kept." She held my gaze. I have answered it. Only then did he turn fully from her, to the door, to the business of a crown that was always waiting. "Prepare the tower." Vesna caught her arm as the guards moved in, close enough that no one else could hear, and the day's sweetness was gone, as if it had never been. You have no idea what you have taken from me, she breathed. Enjoy the tower, sister. They do not last long, the girls they put in that tower. Then her face went soft and sorrowful again, a mask sliding neatly back into place, and Selka understood she had made an enemy who would smile while she worked. They came to lead her away. At the threshold, the king stopped her with 2 words, quiet, meant for her alone. And there was no cruelty in them, and no warmth either, only a question that would follow her up every stair. 2 kinds of creature, he said, can hold an alpha king's eyes and not fall: a fated mate, a pause, or an enemy wearing a girl's face. I mean to learn which you are before the moon does it for me. They put her in the queen's tower, which had stood empty since the old king's wife had died in it, and they told her the rules of the waiting, the way you tell a prisoner the shape of a cell. A claimed mate, who was not yet proven, could not walk freely, could not be seen at court, could not be touched by the one who claimed her until the bond was witnessed. Until the coming moon, the king might visit her only in the small stone oratory that joined her chamber, and even there, a wall would stand between them, a screen of gray stone, carved in a lattice of leaves and thorns, old holes worn smooth by 100 years of prayers. She could sit on her side of it, he could sit on his. They could speak. They could not reach through. It should have felt like a cage. Instead, alone in the dark, for the first time in her life, without a wolf pressing at her from every side of a crowded house, Selka felt something she was ashamed to call relief. The old woman who came to tend her did not lower her eyes at all, and Selka noticed, because by now she noticed everything about eyes. I am Hesper, the woman said, setting down a tray with hands that shook only a little. I kept the last queen. I keep the tower. She poured and watched Selka not drink, and said, without any softening, You are silent. Selka's cup stopped halfway to the table. I have buried 3 of you, Hesper went on, quietly, as if she were discussing the weather and not the whole of Selka's hidden life. I know the look. No scent for the nose, no weight to the room when you enter it. And an alpha's pull runs through you, like water through a net. She sat, heavily. That is why you held him, girl. Not courage. There was simply nothing in you for his crown to bend. Then you know I am not his mate, Selka said low. And not his enemy. I am only broken. That, said Hesper, is where you are wrong, and where you had better start listening, because you have less time than you think. She leaned in. How old are you? 20 at the turn of the year. Something crossed the old woman's face that Selka did not like. The ones I buried, Hesper said. None of them saw 25. That is the part your people never tell the child. A silent is not a wolf that will not wake. A silent is a wolf that is sleeping, and a sleeper who is never roused does not sleep forever. It fades. You fade with it. I have watched it. It is slow, and it is quiet, and it is why we speak of your kind in the past. The tower was very cold. Selka set the cup down before it could spill. There is one waking, Hesper said. Only one. A true mate, freely chosen, who binds to you, wanting you, and no other thing, not out of pity, not out of honor, not to keep a law or heal a dying girl. The wolf tests the wanting. Do you understand me? A bond given for any reason, but the true one goes through you like his pull did, and touches nothing, and you die with a mate at your side and a wolf still asleep. She let that land. So if he is yours, and if he ever learns you are dying, you are finished, because then he can never want you cleanly again. He will only ever be saving you. And the sleeper does not wake for a rescue. She paused. Though mind, these are old stories, and no silent in memory ever had a king who could not look away from her. Where such rules end, even I cannot say. And if he is not the one, Selka asked, though her voice had gone thin. If I only held his eyes, because I am broken, and there is no wanting in him at all. Hesper looked at her with something that was almost pity, and almost respect. Then you will fade in a tower like the last 3. and no one will write your name. But you held an alpha king, child, when 600 wolves could not lift their heads. In all my years, I have never seen that in a silent. I would not spend the little time you have, deciding it means nothing. Selka understood. Then the exact shape of the trap she stood in, and it was more elegant than any Malric could have built. To live, she needed the one man in the world whose power could not touch her to choose her freely. And to keep that choice clean, she could never tell him that her life hung on it. That night he came to the oratory. She heard him settle on the far side of the carved stone, heard the particular quiet of a man who had spent the day being watched, and was tired of it. For a while neither of them spoke, and the not speaking was almost kind. "They tell me you are from Dry Hollow," he said at last. "I did not know anyone lived in Dry Hollow." "Barely anyone does, my lord. It is mostly water, and reeds and people who wish they were somewhere with fewer reeds." A sound came through the stone that she realized, startled, was very nearly a laugh. Then it was gone, and his voice was careful again. "I have to ask you things. You will understand why. You want to know if I am a knife someone slipped into your house?" "Yes, I am not," she said, "but I cannot prove it any more than you can prove the sky will hold. You will have to watch me and decide." She pressed her palm flat to the cold lattice without deciding to. "Ask, and I will tell you what is true. I only ask one thing back. Name it. Do not press the things I cannot answer. There is a piece of me I keep, and it is not a blade, and it is not for anyone. I swear that on whatever a silent girl has left to swear on." She had said the word before she could stop it, and her breath stopped with it. But he did not seize on it. He was quiet a moment, and then, to her astonishment, he simply said, "All right. Not, tell me, not, what are you hiding? Only, all right." And she felt something in her chest come loose that had been clenched for 19 years, and hated a little how much it meant. Then she made the mistake of finding his eyes through the holes in the stone. She had held his gaze in the hall, and felt nothing but her own fear. Now, in the dark, through a wall of carved thorns, she looked at him, and felt a thread pull taut somewhere under her ribs, low and warm and entirely new, as if something that had slept her whole life had, for one instant, turned over. It was gone before she could breathe, but it had been there. On the other side of the stone, the king had gone very still. "Good night, Selka," he said too quietly, and rose and left before she could ask what he had felt, or whether he had felt anything at all. She sat alone with her hand on the cold lattice long after his footsteps had faded, her heart going far too fast, and did not know that 2 floors below her a letter was already being written in a careful, patient hand, or that it began with her name, or that Malric never wrote a name he did not intend to cross out. The hostility did not come at her all at once. It came the way water finds a crack, patient, and everywhere. On the 3rd morning, she found salt across the threshold of her chamber, a thin white line poured by someone who had risen before the sun to do it. She knew what it meant. In the fens they poured salt at the door of a house where something unnatural had been, to keep it from crossing back. Someone in this palace believed she was that something. By the 5th morning, there was salt at the oratory door as well, and the maid who brought her bread would not step over it, but set the tray down in the corridor and left without a word. Selka gathered the salt herself each morning with her own hands and threw it from the window, and did not let anyone see that it cost her anything. The whispers she could not gather up. They reached her through the floors the way sound does in an old tower. The king had set aside the daughter of a great house for a nameless girl from a drowned corner of the map. The king had let his law be held hostage by a servant. The king, they said, and here their voices always dropped, had brought an omen under his roof, and a crown that had been unsteady was now something worse. She understood, listening, that she was no longer only a girl in a tower. She had become the thing men would point to when they wanted to say the king could not be trusted to choose. On the 7th day, they let a noblewoman up to see her, one of the great housewives, on the pretense of teaching the king's chosen how a queen was meant to hold herself. The woman came in scented like a whole garden, looked at Selka for a long moment, and then took a step back and pressed a kerchief to her nose, though there was nothing in the room to smell, because there was nothing to smell on Selka at all, and that absence, to a wolf. "They said you carried no scent," the woman murmured, half to herself. "I did not believe it could be so complete. It is like standing beside an empty coat." She did not stay to teach anything. She left the door open behind her when she went, which in the fens was what you did to let a bad spirit find its own way out of a house. She began to listen on purpose. After that, it was on the 9th night that she heard them. She had not been able to sleep, and the oratory with its cold lattice was the only place that felt like breathing, so she had gone to sit there in the dark, and voices came up through the old stone from the room below, where once priests had kept their wine. She knew one of them at once. Malric had a voice made for small rooms, low and warm and reasonable, the voice of a man explaining why the terrible thing was really the kind thing. "You will not have to wait long," he was saying. "The witnessing will do the work for us. He has claimed a mate. Very well. Let him prove her before the houses as the law demands. And when she cannot, the law he loves so much will hang her, and him beside her in every way that matters." I will not have lifted a hand. And then the second voice, and this one, struck Selka like cold water, because it was Vesna's, and there was nothing soft in it at all. And then a realm needs a steady hand and a proper queen, Malric said. One from a house men trust, one who knows how to be grateful. Selka sat very still in the dark, and understood that she had been wrong about the shape of everything. She had thought Vesna a spiteful girl, and Malric a cruel one, two separate stones in her shoe. They were not separate. They were one blade, and the witnessing was its edge, and she had been placed on the block by people who would never need to hold the axe themselves. That night, when the king came to the oratory, she told him. He was quiet for a long time after. Then he said, "I know what Malric is. I have known since I was a boy. He killed my brother's appetite for the throne with 10 years of patience before he ever thought of killing anything else. A breath. Alden was the bright one the realm wanted." Malric spent those years standing at his shoulder, praising him, and teaching him to doubt every choice he made, until a strong man had second-guessed himself down to a shadow that trusted no counsel but his uncle's. Then Alden took a fever and died of it in a night, and the crown came to me, who never wanted it. I have wondered since whether it was truly a fever. I have never been able to prove that either, which is the whole trouble with my uncle. He leaves no wound you can point to, only absences, a breath. Knowing a wolf is in the grass is not the same as being able to name him to the pack. Half the great houses owe him something. If I move against him with no proof, I am the frightened king striking at shadows, and that is the last thing they need to see. So you can do nothing, so I must be careful, which to a man like Malric looks exactly like doing nothing. There is something raw under the control now. I never wanted this crown, Selka. I was the second son. I was raised to hold my brother's flank, not his throne, and I was good at it, and I was happy. Then he died, and it came to me. And every day since has been a room full of people who want something from a chair I never asked to sit in. He stopped, as if surprised at himself. I have not said that aloud to anyone. Through the holes in the stone she found his eyes, and this time, when the thread pulled taut under her ribs, it brought something with it, faint as a scent she could not name. And it was his, and it was tiredness. And beneath the tiredness, unmistakable, she knew that ache. She had lived inside it her whole life. "They mean to expose me at the witnessing," she said softly. "And you know as well as I do that they might be right to think I will fail it." He did not answer, and his not answering was its own kind of truth, and it followed her back into the dark long after he had gone. And yet, in the days that followed, something happened that neither of them had planned for, which was that they began to be happy. It made no sense, and they both knew it, and it happened anyway. He came to the oratory every night now, and the visits grew longer, and somewhere in them, the careful king and the careful girl forgot to be careful. It started with the reeds. She had said, once, only half meaning it, that the one thing she missed about Dry Hollow was the sound the reeds made in wind, a dry whispering, like the whole marsh telling itself a secret. 3 nights later, she found, pushed through the largest gap in the lattice, a bundle of dried river reed tied with a bit of leather. She sat holding it, and did not trust herself to speak for a while. "You went looking for reeds," she finally said. "For a girl you think might be your enemy." "I sent a man looking," he corrected. "A king cannot be seen gathering weeds. There are standards." And she heard it, the driest thread of humor, the first she had ever caught from him, and she laughed, and through the stone she heard him go still at the sound, the way a man goes still when he has found something he did not know he was hunting. After that they played at questions, one each, any question, and you could refuse to answer, but you had to refuse honestly. She learned that he could not sing, that he had broken the scar in his brow falling out of a tree at 8 and had let everyone believe it was a border skirmish, that he hated the taste of the wine his own vineyards were famous for. She asked him what he would have been, if not king, and he said a master of hounds, with the flat certainty of a man who had thought about it often. She laughed, and he insisted he was entirely serious, that there was no finer life than a warm kennel, and a cold morning and a pack of dogs who wanted nothing from you but their breakfast. She told him it was the saddest ambition she had ever heard, and also the only one at his whole court she believed, and he conceded the point with a grace that surprised her. He learned that she could name every bird in the fens by its call, that she had taught herself to read from a single water-stained book of sermons a peddler had left behind, that she had never in her life been given a thing simply because someone wished her to have it, until the reeds. That one landed wrong. She had said it lightly, and it had not come out light, and the silence on the other side of the stone went deep. Then, "I am glad it was the reeds," he said at last, and neither of them made a joke to cover it, and that was somehow the closest they had yet come. He stayed later that night than the waiting allowed, and neither of them mentioned it. When at last he rose to go, she pressed her hand flat to the lattice, without quite meaning to, and after a moment, on the other side, she felt the warmth of his palm settle against the stone opposite hers. A hand's breadth of cold rock, and 100 years of prayer between them. Through the thread under her ribs, she felt it then, quiet and steady and afraid. The shape of a man carefully deciding not to hope for something. She took her hand away first. It was the kindest thing she could do for either of them. But the moon was fattening in the window, a little more each night, and neither of them could pretend they did not see it. The witnessing had a shape she had learned by now, dragged out of Hesper peace by unwilling peace. Before the great houses, on the full moon, the king and his claimed mate would go to the old running ground and shift together and run the circuit as one, wolf beside wolf, because it was said that only a true bond let 2 wolves run as a single will. It was beautiful, the way she heard it. It was also a door she could not walk through, because there was no wolf in her to shift. And when the moon rose and the king became the great gray thing his blood made him, she would stand on the running ground in a woman's skin before every noble in Kaldar, and they would have their answer. And it would be the last answer she ever gave. She tried anyway. In the locked dark of her chamber, she reached for the thing everyone else carried, reached until she was shaking with it, called to a wolf that had slept so long it might as well have been a story someone told her about herself. Nothing answered. There had never been anything to answer. "Stop," Hesper said, finding her gray-faced on the floor near Dawn. "You cannot claw a thing awake. You will only spend what little you have left." The old woman crouched, joints cracking. "It wakes for wanting. Girl, his wanting, freely given, not yours however hard you dig." "Then tell me how to make a king want," Selka said. Hesper's mouth twisted. "If I knew that, child, I would have sold it long ago and died rich. Wanting is not a lock you can pick. It is there or it is not, and the cruelty laid on your kind is that you can never be the one to put it there. You can only be worth it, and pray he notices in time. Then it will not wake at all, Selka said, because he will not let himself want a woman he thinks only wants to live. And saying it aloud, she understood for the first time that it was true, and that she was going to die of the same wound that was killing him, each of them starving an arm's length from a full table, too afraid of being wanted for the wrong reason to reach for the right one. The moon in the window was 3 nights from full. She decided, on the second of those 3 nights, that she would rather be refused than fade without ever having tried. It was not a brave feeling. Bravery, she had learned, was mostly just fear that had run out of other options. She sat in the oratory, with the reeds in her lap and waited for his step, and when he settled on his side of the stone, she did not let herself think. I want to ask you the last question, she said, and I will not hide behind the game for it. Ask. Come around the stone. Her heart was going so hard, she was sure he could not fail to hear it, wall or no wall, not to prove anything. Not for the houses, not for the law, not to keep Malric from his tidy little future. I am asking for nothing that helps me at the witnessing. Because nothing helps me at the witnessing, and we both know it. She made herself keep going before the fear caught up. I am asking because these nights are the only place I have ever been a person instead of an omen. And the wall is very thin, and I am so tired of talking to a man through a hole in a rock. Come around the stone, Corvin. Because I want you to, for no other reason in the world. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. When he spoke, his voice had changed, gone flat and controlled in the way she had come to know, meant he was holding something down with both hands. You are 3 nights from a trial that could kill you, he said. And Malric's shadow is on every door in this palace. Of course you want the man who could shield you to be more than a wall away. There is no shame in it. It would be strange if you felt anything else. That is not, it is exactly that, he said. And now there was an edge, and the edge was not aimed at her. She understood a beat too late. It was aimed inward, at himself. I have spent my whole life being reached for, Selka. My name, my sword, my brother's crown, when it fell to me. Every hand that has ever taken mine was reaching past me for the thing behind me. I told myself I had made peace with it. A hard breath through the stone. A man learns to stop expecting to be the thing anyone wants. He learns to be useful instead, because useful is at least a place to stand, and a crown is nothing if not useful. I built my whole life on it. I was good at being needed. I stopped noticing that being needed and being wanted are not the same country, that a man can live his whole life in the first one and never once cross the border into the second. And then a girl held my eyes across a hall and did not want a single thing from me because she thought she was about to die, and it was the truest thing anyone had shown me in years. Do not make it into the other thing now. Not you. I could not bear it from you. She sat there with her hands full of dead reeds and felt the floor go out from under everything. He thought she was reaching for the shield. He would not come around the stone because he could not survive being wanted for his use one more time, not from the one person who had made him feel otherwise. And she could not tell him the truth that would clear it, could not say, I am not reaching for your shield, I am reaching for the only thing that could wake the wolf and save my life, because that truth was the very thing that would poison it, because a bond given to save a dying girl was hollow and woke nothing. And, if he knew she was dying, he would only ever be saving her, and the sleeper did not wake for a rescue. The trap closed all the way. Then, to have him, she needed him to believe. She wanted only him. To wake the wolf, she needed that belief to be pure. And the one fact that would explain her reaching, the fact of her own death, was the acid that would eat the purity out of it. Every road led back to silence. All right, she said at last, because there was nothing else left to say, and she heard him flinch at his own word given back to him. Selka. No. You are right. Of course you are right. She stood and gathered the reeds against her chest like something she was keeping safe. Good night, Corvin. She did not look through the stone. She was afraid of what she would feel if she did, afraid that even now the thread would pull and she would sense, under all his careful control, the wanting he would not give and she could not take, and that it would be more than she could carry back up the stairs. She lay awake until the sky, grayed, dry-eyed, past crying, doing the cold arithmetic of it. 2 nights to the witnessing. No wolf, no bond, no way to earn the one and no way to survive the other. She had reached and been refused, and the refusal had been made of love, which was somehow the cruelest part, because love that could not be spoken was worth exactly as much to a dying girl as no love at all. She thought of the reeds, still in her lap, dry and brown, and gathered for her by a man who could say with his hands every soft thing he would not let himself say with his mouth. She thought that this, in the end, was what her whole life had been, a run of small kindnesses passed to her from behind walls, by people too frightened of the cost to step around them. She had been born behind a wall. It seemed she would die behind one. The only difference this time was that she had knocked and heard, on the far side, the unmistakable sound of a man wanting to answer and refusing himself the door. Somewhere below her in the dark, she did not hear the soft sounds of a man readying a horse, or the coin pressed into a guard's palm, or Malric's patient voice saying that 2 nights was more than enough time, and that accidents were so common on the road to a running ground, and that no one ever looked closely at the death of a girl the whole realm already believed was cursed. He had been, he reflected, more than patient. Patience was only cruelty that had learned how to wait, and his had waited long enough. They rode for the running ground the next morning, because the law did not care that a king and a girl had broken each other's hearts through a wall the night before. The witnessing waited 2 days out, at the old circuit in the hills, and the whole court went with them, a long bright ribbon of horses and banners winding up out of the valley, and somewhere in the middle of it, a closed carriage carried the omen. No one wanted to look at. She had not slept. The last thing she had said to him was good night, and the last thing he had said was her name, half-spoken, cut off by a wall, and now there were 100 miles of cold road ahead of them, and a trial at the end of it that would kill her, and between them, the particular silence of 2 people. She pressed the bundle of reeds against her chest under her cloak, where no one could see, and watched the valley fall away behind them, and tried to make her peace with the shortness of what was left. Selka rode alone in it for the first hour. Then the door opened, at a slow stretch of road, and Vesna climbed in, smiling, and sat down across from her as if they were girls again. For a moment, Selka almost welcomed her. There is a terrible habit the heart keeps of reaching for an old cruelty only because it is familiar, and Vesna had been the nearest thing to a sister she had ever had, even when the sistering ran all one direction. But the girl across from her now had chosen her side, and worn it comfortably, and there was nothing left in her to reach for. "You look tired, sister," Vesna said. "You should rest. You will want to look your best. The whole realm will be watching you after all." She smoothed her skirts. "Every single one of them, watching to see what you do when the moon comes up." "You could still stop it," Selka said quietly. "Whatever he has promised you, Vesna. A crown bought this way is a cold thing to sit on." For just a moment, something flickered behind the pretty face, something that might have been the girl Selka had once carried slippers for, then it closed. "You always did think you were better than your place," Vesna said, and knocked for the driver to stop, and got down, and did not look back. Corvin came to the carriage, at the noon halt. He had ridden all morning at the head of the column with his back very straight, being a king, and the effort of it showed now in the set of his jaw. He did not get in. He stood at the open door with the cold hill light behind him and said, "I have men on the road. Whatever happens at the witnessing, you will not be harmed before it. I have seen to that. And after it?" He had no answer for that, and they both knew there was none. And he shut the door gently. the way you close a door on a room where someone is sleeping. She sat in the dark of the carriage after he had gone and pressed her palm flat to the window where his hand had been and felt only wood and cold glass, and understood that this was to be the shape of them now, forever. Two people passing warmth to each other through whatever barrier the world set up next, until the world set up the last one. The attack came in the last light of that day, on the high causeway, where the road ran narrow between two drops, and the escort had to string out single file. Selka never heard the bowstring. She heard Corvin. He was riding beside the carriage when it happened, close as the road allowed, and she was watching his profile through the window because she could not stop herself. And so she saw the exact moment his head came up, saw his whole body change, the way a man changes when some sense older than thought has already decided. He was moving before she understood there was anything to move toward. He drove his horse hard against the carriage, threw himself half out of the saddle, and put his body across the window, across her, in the breath before the bolt arrived. It took him high in the back, below the shoulder. She heard it hit. It was not a sound she would ever be able to unhear. A dull final sound, and under it, worse, a thin bright singing. Because the head of the bolt was silver, and silver in a wolf sings, he made no sound at all. That was the terrible part. He simply folded down against the side of the carriage, one hand still gripping the window frame beside her face, and looked at her with those snow-gray eyes going wide and strange. And the thread under her ribs pulled so hard and so suddenly that she cried out for him, his pain flooding into her all at once, white and cold and vast. She had felt wisps of him before, through the lattice, a thread, a hint of a thing. This was not a thread. This was the whole of him poured into her, with no wall to slow it, and it was agony. And beneath the agony, clear as a struck bell, was the thing he had refused to say through all their careful nights, the wanting. Laid bare in the one instant he had no strength left to hide it. He had thrown himself onto a silver bolt for her, and he was glad of it, even now, even going down, and she felt his gladness, and it broke her more completely than his pain. Corvin, she had his hand. She did not remember reaching for it. Corvin, look at me, look at me. Around them the causeway erupted, horses screaming, guards shouting, steel drawn, someone bellowing to find the archer. Find him, take him alive. But it was all very far away. All of it was on the other side of a wall now, and on her side there was only the king of Kaldar, sliding down out of the saddle into the dust of a mountain road with silver singing in his blood, and his grip on her hand loosening, finger by finger, and his eyes losing her. Stay, she begged him. Stay. You have to stay. I never told you, Corvin. I never got to tell you. But his eyes had already rolled back, and his hand slipped from hers, and the great, gray thing inside him that no wolf in the realm could stand before went out like a snuffed candle, and Selka was left holding nothing at all. They carried him to a hunting lodge below the causeway, because it was the nearest roof, and they laid him face down on a long table, and the king's own physician cut the bolt free and went white at what he found. The silver has gone into the wolf, he said. To no one, to the rune. Not the body will mend. But the wolf, he did not finish. He did not have to. Every wolf in the doorway understood, and one by one they stepped back from it, the way you step back from a thing that is already partly a ghost. How long? The king's steward asked, very low, and the physician spread his hands. The silver may pass. It may not. I have seen a wolf come back from this in a year, and I have seen a wolf never come back at all, and be a man in every way, but the one that makes a man a king. There is no telling it in advance. There is only the waiting. And the waiting is the one thing his enemies will not give him. Selka did not step back. She took the place at his head that no one else wanted, and she stayed in it. They tried everything the physician knew. They drew the silver out, grain by grain. They packed the wound with things that stank of the earth. And through all of it, Corvin lay in a fever that was not like other fevers because his senses were going, one after another, the way lamps go out in a house at night. By the second day, he could not smell the physician standing over him. By the third, he could not feel the pack bond that every wolf carried like a second heartbeat, the low constant awareness of one's own kind. He woke into a silence he had never known in his life, a man who had always felt the whole world leaning toward him suddenly alone inside his own skin, and it frightened him more than the wound. She understood the geography of that fear better than any physician alive. She knew the particular vertigo of a room that would not lean toward you the way a silence could feel exactly like falling. She had spent 19 years learning to stand upright inside it, and every trick she had ever taught herself she now gave to him, in the dark, in whispers, between the waves of the fever. On the second night he woke enough to understand his own weakness and hated it aloud, and she let him, because she knew that too, the fury of a proud thing brought low. She did not tell him it would pass, because she did not know that it would. She only stayed, and held the cup, and was not frightened, and in the end, her not being frightened did more for him than anything the physician mixed. Selka knew that silence, she had been born in it, so she stayed, and she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to be a person in a room by voice alone, because she had never had anything else to be known by. She talked to him. She told him about the fens, the names of all the birds, the way the reeds sounded. When he thrashed, she put her hands on his face and spoke low until he stilled, and she learned quickly that her touch settled him when nothing else did, and it was a long time before she understood why. It was the third night when it happened. His fever crested, and he came half awake, wild-eyed, his ruined senses giving him nothing. No scent, no aura, no pack, a man blind and deaf in every way that had ever mattered to his kind. People crowded the room, the physician, 2 guards, a frightened boy with water. Corvin looked straight through all of them. He did not know them. His senses could not find them, and his eyes in the fever would not focus. And he began to panic, to fight the hands holding him down. "Where is she?" he said. His voice cracked. "Where is Selka?" They meant it for Selka. The bolt was for her. "Where is she? Is she? I am here." She caught his face in both hands. "Corvin, I am here." And she watched it happen. She watched him go still. Not because he saw her, he could barely see at all, and not because he smelled her, for there had never been anything of her to smell, not for him, not for anyone. He knew her the way he had always secretly known her, the only way she had ever been knowable, by the shape of her presence and the sound of her voice and the thread that ran between them under everything. His broken senses had stripped the whole world down to nothing, and in that nothing she was the one thing left that he could still find, because she had always lived in the place his other senses could not reach. "You are safe," he breathed. "Not am I. Not what has become of me. Only that. You are safe. I am safe. You saved me, you foolish, foolish man." "Good," he said, as if that settled the entire matter of his life, and his eyes closed, and this time it was only sleep. Selka sat back on her heels, with her heart breaking, in a way she had not known hearts could break, upward, into something almost too large to hold. He had woken with no wolf, no senses, nothing of what made him a king, and the single thing he had reached for in the dark was her safety. Not the crown, not his own life. Her. He wanted her. He had wanted her all along, wanted the girl, and not the use, and had been so certain no one could that he had refused to let himself believe it, even when it was holding his face in the dark. She thought of every hand that had ever passed her a kindness through a gap in a wall, and understood that she had spent her whole life mistaking walls for the whole of what people were, when all along there had been in at least this one man, someone willing to tear the wall down if only she would let him believe he was allowed. She had not let him. She saw it now. The wall on his side had been built as much from her fear as from his. Down in the courtyard they had the archer in chains. He had loosed silver on the king and been run down before he reached the trees, and he was a hard man who would say nothing, but the fletching on his bolts was cut in a particular way, and the boot he wore was good leather for a hired killer, and Selka, watching from the window with her hands still shaking, thought that Malric, for all his patience, had at last left a wound that someone might point to. She did not yet know what she would do with that thought. She only knew that she had spent her whole life being acted upon, hidden and moved and married off and set upon a block, and that somewhere in these last 4 days, kneeling at the head of a dying king who had spent his final waking breath on her safety, she had stopped being a thing that happened to people and become very quietly a person who might make things happen herself. The fever broke on the 4th day. The king would live, but the price had come due, and it was exactly the price the physician had feared. Corvin could not shift. When he reached for the change, for the great gray shape that was his birthright and his crown both, there was nothing there. The silver had gone into the wolf and silenced it, and no one could say whether the silence would lift in a season or a year or ever. And with the wolf went the pole, the weight that had bent 600 heads in a hall. When a servant came in now, she did not lower her eyes. She simply looked at him, a man in a bed, and did not know she was doing anything remarkable. And Selka saw him notice, and saw what it cost him. And Alpha's whole life is lived inside the fact of the pull, the constant proof, in every lowered eye, that he matters. To lose it is to walk through your own house and find the walls no longer know your name. They do not bow, he said. The first morning he understood it. His voice was flat. I walk into a room and nothing happens. I am a wolf that will not come, in a kingdom that only respects the wolf. A terrible quiet. I have become the very thing they were afraid you were. Yes, Selka said, because he did not need her to soften it. He needed her to be the one person who was not afraid of it. You have. Welcome. It is not as bad as they told you, and it is worse in ways they never mention. And I know every inch of it, and you are not going to walk it alone. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her astonishment, the corner of his mouth moved. You are enjoying this. I am enjoying being the one who knows something. For once, she admitted. It is a novel sensation. Allow me it. And so began the strangest apprenticeship in the realm. A queen who had never once been a wolf teaching a king, who was no longer quite one how to live. In a body the world had stopped obeying. She taught him to enter a room without the pull and hold it with his voice instead. The way she had learned to hold the hall, with nothing but a lifted chin. She taught him that a silence could be a place to think, rather than a place to drown. He was, she informed him, a slow student, with an excellent excuse. He informed her that she was the only tutor in the realm, cruel enough to mock a crippled king. And they were both, in those strange days, nearer to laughter than either had been in years. And that, absurdly, in a lodge on a cold hill, with an assassin in the cellar, and a crown coming apart in the valley below, was where they began to heal. They could not go back to court. A king who could not shift would not survive a week among the great houses, and Malric would see to the rest. So Corvin did the one thing his enemies would never expect a proud man to do. He went to ground, in the last place. In the realm, anyone would look for the king of Kaldar. He went to Dry Hollow. They traveled quietly, a small party, no banners, and when the reeds first came into view across the flat, bright water, mile upon mile of them whispering in the wind exactly as she had described, Selka watched him take it in from the wagon, this drowned corner of the map that had made her, and she braced for the pity or the politeness. It sounds like the whole marsh is telling itself a secret, he said and said, quietly. And she remembered saying those very words to him through a wall a lifetime ago, and she had to look away so he would not see her face. She had braced her whole life for people to recoil from where she came from, the drowned poor corner that had bred a scentless girl, and instead, the king of Kaldar sat in a wagon, looking out over her ruined kingdom of reeds, as though she had shown him something rare, and named its beauty back to her in her own words. It undid her more thoroughly than any cruelty ever had. Cruelty she knew how to stand against. She had no defense at all for being understood. There was no lattice in Dry Hollow. That was the thing she kept returning to those first days. No screen, no waiting, no custom that said a claimed mate must be kept behind stone. Here she could simply sit beside him. She could hand him a cup and let their fingers touch. The wall that had stood between them for weeks was 100 miles behind them in an empty tower. And yet the other wall, the true one, the one made of everything, they could not say that one had come with them. He nearly took it down himself. One evening, they were sitting on the old jetty watching the light go copper across the water, and he said, without looking at her, "You told me once there was a piece of you that you kept, that it was not a blade, and not for anyone." He turned then, and his snow-gray eyes were steady on hers. "I have wondered, every day since, what it was. I want you to know that I have never once tried to guess, and that whatever it is, it changes nothing I feel. I only wish you did not have to carry it alone." Selka's whole body went still. The truth rose in her like water. She could tell him now. She could say the word, silent, say the fade, say the wolf, that would never wake without him. She wanted to so badly, her chest ached with it. And she remembered the rule, and she stopped, one heartbeat short of the cliff. Because if she told him she was dying, he would love her as a rescue for the rest of her short life. And the sleeper did not wake for a rescue, and she would have thrown away the only thing that could save her for the relief of not being alone in it. "Thank you," she said instead, and put her hand over his, and let that be all. "One day, not yet, but one day, I promise you, I will put it in your hands." He nodded, and did not push, and turned back to the water. And Selka loved him so much in that moment that it frightened her, because she could feel, low in her bones now, in a way she had been pretending not to notice for days, that she was running out of the time in which to do it. She had begun to fade. She had known it would come. Hesper, who had insisted on making the journey, and now ruled the little kitchen at Dry Hollow like a fortress, saw it before Selka admitted it, in the gray that had crept under her eyes, and the way stairs had started to cost her something. "It is the sorrow that speeds it," the old woman said grimly, kneading bread as though it had wronged her. "You have spent weeks with your heart on a rack. The body follows the heart down. You do not have until the year turns, girl. You have weeks, if you are lucky, and you rest, and you are not resting." Selka took the news standing at the kitchen window, watching Corvin down on the jetty, trying, patiently and in secret, to teach himself to fish, because a wolf who could not hunt must learn to feed himself as a man, and he was too proud to be seen failing at it. And watching him lose another line, and swear quietly at the water, and bait the hook again, this hard, proud king humbled down to a boy who did not know what he was doing. Selka felt the last of her resolve go quiet and clear and certain. So Selka made a decision, there in the flour-dusted kitchen, and it was the first truly free decision of her whole managed and hidden life. She was not going to spend her last weeks trying to trick a wolf awake. She was going to spend them living, and so they had, against all sense, the happiest days either of them had ever known. She took him out into the fens in the flat-bottomed boat she had learned to pole as a child, and taught him the birds by their calls, until he could name a bittern from a reed warbler with his eyes shut, and laughed at him when he got them wrong, which was often. She showed him the drowned village, and the heron's nest, and the place where the water ran so still you could not tell the sky from its reflection, so that the boat seemed to hang in the middle of the air. He was quiet out there in a way he never was on land, and once he said that he understood, now, why a person raised in a place like this might learn to hold still and watch, might learn to know things by presence instead of scent, might in fact be the only person in the realm equipped to survive what had happened to him. "You have been training your whole life," he said, "for the disaster that just became mine." And she thought that was the kindest thing anyone had ever said about the curse that was killing her. There were evenings when they did not speak at all, only sat on the jetty, as the light went down, his shoulder against hers, near enough that the thread between them hummed low and content, and she would think, "This, I would trade every year. I am not going to get for 100 more evenings exactly like this one, and mean it entirely." On the 7th evening, she gave him her gift. She had asked the village carver for it in secret, and it had cost her nearly everything she had, which was not much. It was a small thing, a whistle cut from fen oak, carved with the shape of a bittern. "When you cannot feel the pack," she said, "and the silence gets too loud, you blow it, and I will come. Wherever I am, it is not a pack bond. But it is a promise, and a promise you can hear is better than a bond you cannot." It was a foolish gift for a king, a child's whistle whittled from a poor man's marsh, and she nearly snatched it back the moment it left her hand. But he did not laugh, and he did not thank her in the smooth court way that meant nothing at all. He turned it over and over in his scarred fingers, this soldier who had commanded armies, as though she had set a crown in his palm and not a bit of carved reed. He held it in his scarred hand for a long time. Then he closed his fingers around it and looked at her, and the thread between them drew so tight and so warm that she swayed with it, and he reached up and touched her face, and for one endless breath they were a hand's width apart, and there was no wall in the world between them, no stone, no law, no lie. And she watched his eyes drop to her mouth, and she thought, "At last, at last." The rider came up the causeway at a gallop, and the moment shattered like ice. The news he brought was all bad. Malric had not waited. With the king vanished, and rumored crippled, he had called the great houses to council, laid out the story of a monarch too broken to rule, and too bewitched by an omen to see it, and moved to have the claim declared void, and the crown set in trust, his trust, until a proper king could be got on a proper queen. Vesna sat at his side in the telling, they said, veiled in mourning, grey as though the king were already dead. The houses were wavering. In a fortnight it would be done, and lawfully, and there would be no undoing it. Selka watched the news land on Corvin, and watched something in him decide. He did not rage. He went very calm, which she had learned to fear more. That night he did not come to sit with her. In the morning, he was different, gentle and far away, a man arranging things, and when she found him at the jetty, he said the thing she had been dreading in a shape she had not expected. "I am sending you away," he said. "There is a ship at the coast. A silent girl with no name can vanish into the world and live a long, quiet life, and no Malric will ever hunt her, because she will be nothing to anyone." He would not look at her. "I cannot beat him, Selka. Not like this. I can save you, or I can lose everything and take you down with me, and I have decided. You will be safe. It is the only thing left that I can still do for you, and I am going to do it whether you forgive me or not." He had thought it all through. She could see. He had the ship, the papers, the story ready. He had arranged her disappearance with the same grim competence he brought to everything, and every piece of it was an act of love, and every piece of it was a wall, the tallest one yet, built to keep her alive on the far side of his own ruin. It was the most Corvin thing he had ever done, and she hated it with her whole heart. And there it was, his wound turned inside out into a knife, the same wound as hers. He would rather set her free than fail to be her shield. He would rather be useful, one last terrible time, than admit that the only thing she had ever wanted from him was him. Selka stood on the jetty in the failing light, and understood that she was out of walls to hide behind, and out of time to be careful, and that the moment she had promised him, the one where she put the last piece of herself in his hands, had arrived whether she was ready or not. "No," she said. "Selka, no. You will be quiet now, Corvin, and you will listen, because I have spent my whole life being quiet, and I find I am done." Her voice was shaking, and she did not care. "You want to send me away to be safe and nameless and nothing, because being nothing kept me alive for 19 years, And you think that is a kindness. It is not. It is the same coward's mercy everyone has ever shown me. You do not get to be one more person who loves me by putting a wall between us for my own good. Everyone has managed me, she said. My whole life, my foster family hid me to keep their name clean. Vesna kept my secret to keep me useful. Malric would kill me to keep his path tidy. And now you would put me on a ship and send me across the sea to keep me breathing. And every last one of you calls it the kind thing, and not one of you has ever once asked me what I would choose. And you are going to hear it, because you owe me that much. Corvin, you owe me one honest conversation before you send me off to be no one for the rest of my life. He stared at her. Behind them the reeds had gone silver in the dusk. Here is the piece of me I kept, she said. The one I promised to put in your hands. I am going to give it to you now, and I need you to understand, before I do, that I am not telling you this to be saved. I am telling you because I am done lying to the one person I have ever wanted to be honest with. She drew a breath that hurt. I am silent. Corvin, not cursed. Made. There is no wolf in me, and there never has been, and that is why your pull never touched me in that hall. Why no scent ever came off me. Why I could hold your eyes when no one else in the realm could lift their heads. It was never courage. I am simply empty where every other wolf is full. I know, he said. The world stopped. I have known since the tower, he said quietly. Since the night you swore on what a silent girl had left to swear on, and did not think I heard the word inside the words. I have known for weeks. I did not press, because you asked me not to, and because it did not matter. It has never once mattered. Selka, do you understand me? I did not want the wolf. I wanted the woman who did not bow. She had braced, all this time, for the moment he learned the truth. She had imagined it 100 ways, and in not one of them had he already known, and stayed, and gone on coming to the oratory, night after night, and gathered her reeds, and thrown his own body onto silver, all of it with the word silent already in his keeping. He had known exactly what she was, and chosen her every single day, and never once let her feel the weight of the knowing. The plain generosity of it took the breath clean out of her. She was crying now, freely, all the careful years of it coming down at once. Then hear the rest, she said, because it is worse. A silent does not simply lack a wolf. A silent fades. We do not see 30, most of us. We do not see 25. And there is one waking, one only. The true bond of a mate who chooses us freely, wanting us and nothing else. No pity, no rescue, no crown, no law. That is why I could not tell you I was dying. Because the moment you knew, you would only ever be saving me, and a wolf does not wake for a rescue. I had to be wanted for myself or not at all, so I chose not at all. I chose to spend what was left being happy with you rather than tricking you into keeping me. That was my choice, and I would make it again, and you do not get to take it from me by putting me on a ship. Corvin's face had gone through grief and fury and something vast and wordless, and now, slowly, it arrived somewhere she did not expect. It arrived at wonder. You knew, he said, that telling me could cost you the only cure there is. And you told me, anyway, not to be saved, because you would rather I have the truth than have you. He laughed. A broken, astonished sound. Selka. Do you not see what you have just done? You have wanted me more than you wanted to live. There is no purer wanting than that in all the world. And he crossed the last of the distance between them, this wolfless king with no pole and no crown, and nothing left to offer any woman but the man that he was. And he took her face in his scarred hands and he said, I choose you. Not to save you, though I would raise the realm to the ground to do it. I choose you because in a life where every soul who ever touched me was reaching for something behind me, you reached through everything I could give and took only me. I spent my whole life certain that if I ever set the crown down, there would be nothing underneath it worth a single soul's love. And you have just told me you would die before you let that crown be the reason I kept you. Do you know what that makes me, Selka? It makes me a man who is wanted with nothing at all in his hands. I did not know that could happen to me. I did not know it could happen to anyone. I have nothing left, and you want me anyway, and I want you, Selka, only you, freely, for no reason in the world, but that you are you. He kissed her. And through the thread that had run between them since a hall full of lowered eyes, she felt it complete, felt his wanting pour into the empty place where a wolf should be, pure and unpitying and free. And something down in the dark of her that had slept since before she could remember turned over, and stretched, and opened its eyes. Her wolf woke. It came up through her like sunrise through water, warmth spreading out to the ends of her, a second heartbeat starting beside her own, and with it came the whole world she had been deaf to her entire life. All at once, overwhelming, the green breath of the reeds and the cold iron of the water and, over everything, him. The scent of the man she loved arriving in her senses for the very first time, so that in a single instant she was more alive than she had been in 19 years of careful half-living, and she gasped against his mouth, and he pulled back to look at her, and his eyes went wide. For the first time, there was a scent to find hers, rich and alive and utterly new, and it hit him like a struck chord, and the completed bond flowed back the other way, into him, into the silence the silver had made, and something answered there too. He shifted. He had not been able to for a month, and now, without trying, the great gray shape rolled up out of him as easy as breathing, and stood on the jetty in the last light, enormous and whole, and lowered its huge head to press against her. His wolf had woken her bond had woken his. For a long moment the great gray wolf and the girl stayed there together in the dark, two creatures who by every law and every grim old story should both have been dead or dying, and were instead, impossibly, whole. The silver had not passed on its own. No remedy had drawn it out. It was the bond that had done it, flowing into the silver's silence the way her woken wolf had flowed into hers. And Selka understood, with her arms full of warm gray fur, that Hesper had been right about everything except the ending. The rule had never been that a silent must be saved by another. The rule was that neither of them could be saved alone. They had only ever been able to save each other. Selka wrapped her arms around the great gray neck and wept into his fur, and somewhere very close a bittern called across the darkening fen, and for the first time in her whole silent life, something inside her called back. She did not know how long they stayed there, the wolf, and the woman, and the whispering fen, but at some point, Corvin came back into his own skin and held her, truly held her warm and whole and hers, with no wall of any kind left between them, and against her hair he said the thing that turned her grief into a plan. "Now," he said quietly, "let us go and show my uncle what he woke." They came back to Kaldar in the last week of autumn, and this time no one had to be told the king had arrived. The great houses had gathered at the running ground for what Malric had promised would be the formal setting aside, the tidy legal end of a broken king and his cursed omen. He had staged it beautifully. The circuit was ringed with every noble of consequence in the realm. Vesna stood at his side in her mourning gray, already half a queen. And when word came that Corvin had returned and meant to answer the witnessing after all, Malric only smiled, because a witnessing needed two wolves to run as one, and everyone knew the king could not shift and the girl had never been able to. Selka felt the whole field turn to watch them walk in. She did not lower her eyes. She had stopped doing that on a jetty in the fens, and she was never going to start again. "Nephew," Malric said, warm and reasonable to the last, "you should have taken the ship. Whatever you think you have come here to prove, you cannot. The law is the law. Run the circuit as one, or the claim is void and the crown passes to steadier hands. We both know you cannot." "You are right," Corvin said. "A month ago I could not." He looked at Selka, and she looked back, and the thread between them sang, "A great many things have changed since your man put silver in my back on the causeway." That is the trouble with wounds, uncle. Sometimes, at last, they leave one. A person can point to. They shifted together. It went through the crowd like a shockwave. 600 wolves feeling the king's pull roar back to life all at once, heads dropping across the whole field in a great falling wave. And beside the huge gray wolf that had bent them stood a second wolf no one had ever seen. Because mates run as equals, or they do not run at all. They ran the circuit as one will, the way the oldest law said only a true bond could. And when they came back to the center of the ring, there was not a soul present who could say the bond was false, because it was written now in every sense, a wolf possessed. The great houses that had gathered to bury a crippled king found themselves instead on their knees before the truest bond any of them had witnessed in a generation, and men who had spent a month drifting quietly toward Malric remembered, all at once and very loudly, that they had of course always been the king's most loyal friends. The unraveling of Malric took less time than his patience had. The archer in the cellar of the hunting lodge had found his tongue at last, once it was clear which way the wind had turned, and the fletching matched the arrows in Malric's own huntmaster's stores, and a bought guard, faced with a king whose pull he could no longer refuse, confessed the coin and the hand that gave it. Malric did not rage either. Men like him never do. He simply grew very still as the thing he had built came apart, and understood, perhaps for the first time, that he had finally moved too soon. As for Vesna, she was still wearing her mourning gray when they led her uncle away, and she had the sense, at least, to take it off before she fled the field, and the realm did not hear her name again. That winter Selka was crowned queen, and she stood beside her husband, while 600 wolves lowered their eyes to them both, and the one who had held the Alpha King's gaze when no one else dared held it still, and always would. Hesper stood at the front of the crowd for the crowning, and did not lower her eyes either, and wept, which she would deny to her last day. She lived, of course. The wolf that woke on the jetty never slept again, and the fade let go of her the way a fever lets go, and she grew old in the end, very old, with him, which is a thing no silent before her had ever done. They say in Calder now, that if you are the only one in a crowded room who will not look away, it may be the loneliest thing in the world, or it may be the truest, and that you cannot always know which until someone looks back. Thank you for listening. I hope this one stayed with you. Tell me in the comments, do you think Selka was right to keep her secret to protect the bond? Or should she have trusted Corvin with the truth from the start? I always want to know what you would have done. Look after yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.